Gravity Falls, a Disney Channel show that aired in 2012 to 2016 and just celebrated its 10-year anniversary. It was created by Alex Hirsch and captivated millions of viewers, including yours truly. But besides the show's dark humor and intricate conspiracies, one of the things that most stood out to me was the Mystery Shack. I wanted to bring this majestic shack to life, which, paired with my obsession at the time with watching model making videos, made me want to try it out for myself. So, just a quick disclaimer, this was one of my first times trying to make a model, so if you're planning to try this out yourself, I really recommend not trying to replicate all the methods and materials I used while building, because I'm pretty inexperienced myself, and there were definitely easier ways I could have gone about doing this, and I kind of just jumped into the building process without a plan, which led to some problems later, as you'll see. Anyways, let's get into it, and if you like what you see, consider subscribing. Before I had the idea to film this process, I made paper stencils and cut out pieces of foam to be the size of the model. I then glued them together to make the general shape of the shack. I wanted to add some wood texturing to the sides, so I trimmed the ends off of a bunch of multicolored popsicle sticks so that they'd be rectangular wood plank shapes. Whenever I cut them though, it sent the ends hurtling across the room, and I had to search for these things for a solid 15 minutes afterwards because they were so small and were launched so far. Once the ends were trimmed, I laid them out using the paper stencils of the walls to get a general shape for the popsicle sticks, and then I made sure to cover them in lots of tape so that they'd stay together. Once I was done with this, I traced along the edges of the paper stencils so that they'd be the exact shape of the walls. I traced along these lines with an X-Acto knife, which then made it a lot easier to cut them out with scissors. I also cut out a hole for the door and the windows, because at the time I'd been planning to put lights inside the shack to shine through the openings once it was done. Later on you'll see that did not end up happening, but props to pass me for trying. The triangular window up at the top was pretty difficult to cut out since I could only use the X-Acto knife, but after a couple of attempts I was finally able to make the hole. Turning my attention back to the foam outline, I lined the holes I had cut out for the windows with trimmed down popsicle sticks to cover up the exposed insides of the foam board. I didn't really have measurements for this, so it was mostly just trial and error until they fit. Once all the windows had a nice trim, I glued on the wood texture into the walls, and luckily they fit perfectly. Plus, I think the rainbow popsicle sticks really added the Maple Pines-esque pop of color the shack was missing. For the other sides of the shack, I glued on rolled up strips of paper to resemble logs. I also lined the top of the walls with pieces of foam to better attach the roof. Unfortunately, I didn't film this process, but here's what it looked like after I glued everything on. I'm not really sure why I did this, but I attached the roof to the gift shop before I began the painting process. Using my lovely acrylics, I mixed up a nice brown color, because with the base and texturing done, it was time to begin the first layer of paint. I used rainbow popsicle sticks for the siding because at the time they were all I had, but since they were so colorful, you could still kind of see them through the first few layers of paint. I don't really have much else to say here, so enjoy a fun little painting montage. Once the shack was fully covered in a brown base coat, I decided to glue on the roofs. Then, I glued on strips of paper to cover up any gaps between the foam boards, including the top ridges and the seam where the two roof segments met. I'd noticed the rolled paper used for the logs had uneven round edges, so I cut out small circles of cardboard to cover them up and make them seem more cylindrical. To cover up the exposed edges of the foam roofing, I cut out strips of cardboard and glued them on. Now ready to finally add some texture to the roof, I began the process of gluing on individual hand-cut cardboard roof tiles. This process may have been pretty time-consuming, but I'm happy with how it all turned out. Prepare yourselves for a tile montage. Here I decided to do some last-minute roof trims and add some final touches before painting. Next, I added the roof support beams out of small rectangular cut pieces of the foam board. For some reason I wanted to create a general outline for the triangular window frames, so I lined the holes with thin strips of paperboard. Then I added a vertical strip for the bar thingy that separates the two window panes, and I tried to look up the official architectural name for it, and I think it's called a mullion, but it might also be a muntin, so please forgive me if I'm wrong here, I tried. Okay, before the second round of painting starts, I just want to take a quick second to enjoy this fun little 360 view of the shack's progress I filmed. You know, I was just happy with how it was going and I thought it looked good. Also at this point, all my stuff was getting in the way, so I was banished to the floor. Okay, so here's round 2 of painting. I'd heard a tip that recommended starting with a full coat of a darker color, and then later on going over it in lighter shades, so I covered the shack in a layer of dark brown paint to start. It ended up looking a lot darker than expected, and it looked kinda goth, so at this stage I'd nicknamed it the Emo Shack. Next, I hid the exposed foam in the beams by covering them in more paperboard, then painted over them in the dark brown paint. Now that the dark base layer was complete, I began going over the walls in a layer of lighter brown. Once that was done, I realized it was time to add the base/deck thing the shack rests on. Ready for a cool transition? Wham! Repeating the way I made the shack's front walls, I glued down a bunch of rainbow popsicle sticks for some fun wood texturing. I do not know what was up with these hand gestures, but here you go. Whoa, another cool YouTube transition. Continuing on with the painting, I added a light layer of highlights and shading to really give the shack that rustic feel. Also, this is where I finally started filming horizontally, so now you can see the shack making process in all of its glory and not just in a tiny sliver on your screen. Another little 360 view. Once the walls were in pretty good shape, I turned my attention towards the roof. I added highlights and streaks of other colors to make the shingles appear weathered and to continue with making the shack seem worn down and lived in. While I waited for all that to dry, I then started to paint the base. I knew this would take a couple layers of paint, so I again started with a darker color, and I also didn't want any of the white to show through, so I just decided to paint the whole thing. And of course, once this was done, I started the lighter layer and did my best to color match it to the walls I'd painted for the shack. It's important to mention that my workstation was becoming more and more disheveled and disorganized as this went on. But such are the sacrifices of a shack builder. Speaking of shacks, off camera, I'd taken an X-Acto blade and carved out the crack in the roof, and then I painted in it with dark paint to really accentuate the fissure. Also off camera, I'd cut out and painted 2 bits of paperboard to serve as the hasty wood repairs. In some scenes of the show, it seemed like there were 3 of them, but I thought most of the pictures showed 2, so I ultimately decided not to add a 3rd. With all the large-scale shack construction done, I could finally start making the smaller details, so I started with the front doors and the screen door to the gift shop. For the screen door, I cut out 2 different pieces and layered them to make the paneling of the door and give it more dimension. I painted the front doors that good old mahogany brown color, while I painted the gift shop door beige and added a bit more detail. I almost forgot to paint the handle black, but don't worry, I caught myself. I rolled more strips of paper and painted them to make that log front door frame. Once those were all drying, I could finally move on to the windows. I sketched out all the frames and then carved them out with my handy dandy X-Acto blade. I painted all the frames black, and then off camera I painted sheets of paper with watercolor to look like the stained glass. At this point I had realized that it would be too complicated to try to put a light inside the shack, so I also painted a blue piece of paper to serve as the window for the gift shop screen door. With my small army of windows and doors all assembled, it was time to glue them all on. This far along in building, it was actually starting to resemble the Mystery Shack, except it was still uncomfortably bare. So of course, it was time to make more details to really begin embellishing it. To start, I began to tackle the gift shop overhang. Amidst all the materials I'd saved up and recycled for this project, I'd found a piece of corrugated paper that I thought would be perfect for it. I painted it a nice light blue color and then set it out to dry. Since all the rectangular windows were done, I thought it was about time the triangular windows got their time to shine. For each window frame, I cut out 2 pieces that I would layer together to give it a bit of extra thickness. They remind me a lot of Bill Cipher, and I feel like they were probably designed to resemble him. And like with the other windows, I used yellow painted paper to give it the stained glass effect. I carefully carved a piece of foam to resemble the ornate gift shop sign, and then covered it with carved paperboard to serve as a reference for when I painted it and to add even more detail. I also lined the edges with paper to cover up the exposed foam. I let the glue dry, but since I have iMovie Magic on my side, it's already time to paint. And then to actually spice stuff up, I added the golden lettering and details. Now it's time for the billboards. I used cut rectangles of foam covered in paper for the actual board part, and to make the letters, I cut them out of paper and paperboard. I then painted the mystery letters black and the shack letters red, adding a little orange to brown ombre to give them some dimension. I painted the base billboards yellow, but then really wanted to find a way to kind of grime them up for that weathered look, so I tried a couple different things and eventually was able to land on something that I was happy with, though as you'll see, it definitely took me a couple of attempts. I kind of just played around with it, but I feel like after a bit I was really able to find a nice compromise. With this being said, I do look back on these billboards as one of the hardest parts of my entire process solely because of this painting step, so I cannot express how relieved I was when this bit was over. Eventually, I was happy with how it was looking, so I added the grimy gray S outline that's still on the sign from when the letter fell off. And I also added some gross gray shading to the bottom of the boards. This helped give the overall build depth, but I also feel like this grimification shows that this shack has been through a lot, so we can't exactly expect it to be in pristine condition. In pictures of the billboards, the red shack letters seem to have a black underline, so I very carefully painted that onto the sign so it'd create a cool layering effect when I glued it all on later. I attached all the mystery letters, and then I very carefully arranged all the red shack letters. They kept curling up on the ends, so I taped it all down to let it dry. Off camera, using toothpicks, the ever iconic pasta box straps, and sheer determination, I somehow managed to build the mini weather vane that sits atop the gift shop. Using more pasta box strips and paper, I also made the lights and speaker thingy that hang near the billboards on the roof, and once it was all dry, I painted them their respective colors. Now you don't see this from the front view of the shack, but there's actually a little trap door that's on the other side of the gift shop roof. So I made that using some layered pasta boxes, because pasta boxes are anything if not dependable and inescapable. Then I began to paint whatever this is. It's either like an exhaust pipe or a chimney, but whatever it is, it's the silver thing that sticks out of the roof. I stuck it on using some Elmer's glue and tape. I probably should have used hot glue, but this worked. Then I started adding some of the signs I made earlier just because I wanted to get a general idea for how the roof would look with all the new additions I was about to make. I then glued on some black paper letters that I'd cut out and painted earlier to the front to spell it Mystery Shack. I also think the design of the A is pretty clever because it resembles Bill Cipher. So nice foreshadowing there, and shout out to the show's designers and animators for that one. I'm sorry, that's all I see when I watch that film footage. But yeah, Mystery Shack, we did it, we can spell. The letters on the front simply don't cut it. We need some giant billboards on the roof to tell us exactly where we are. After a couple of attempts, I used some good old trusty hot glue to attach these, and seeing them on the shack made me really happy with how they turned out. I also very carefully glued on the weather vane. Wow, look at that. Oh, it's all coming together, guys. Don't worry, it gets even better. Nice little panoramic view there, I guess. Oop, I just kept spinning it. Yep, you get all the angles here. Then, once the signs and everything were dry, I glued on the lights and the speaker that also sit on the roof. Then I glued on the little trap door and added so much tape, I don't know why. It's not going anywhere. Yeah, and then it was at this moment that I found pictures of the back of the shack. Now, while you watch me construct a chimney, I will explain why this was a bit of an issue. As you know, I sort of jumped into this project head first. I mean, I had my reference photos, I researched what the shack looked like, I watched the show. But for the life of me, I could not find pictures of the back of the shack, or like the back porch, so I didn't know it existed. It wasn't until I was perusing through Safari one day looking for more reference photos that I had the bright idea to look up back of the Mystery Shack, and lo and behold, I found the pictures. And I mean, it wasn't a huge deal, it's just a couple more details to make. Like this lovely little extension that you can watch right now. Look at me glue those pieces on. But it was just a wee bit of a shock. So kids, do your research beforehand and make sure you have all sides of your buildings when you're making a model. Alright, tangent over, back to the narration. Yeah, so the little roof extension and this chimney were all assembled, so I set them off to the side to dry. Yeah, so the little roof extension actually has a window on the front. So while they were drying, I cut out and painted the little window frame, and whoa, there's another Bill Cipher reference. Very cool. Not fully sure why I painted the back, but that was also something I did. So in that time, the chimney and the roof extension dried, so I started painting them. I made the chimney a nice, lovely little pink color, then made it more brick and aged and weathered. Then went over that in more details to really distinguish the bricks and the little hole in the top of the chimney. Once the chimney was done, I painted the roof extension to match the color of the roof tiles and to match the light brown of the log walls of the shack. By now the window frame had dried, so I watercolored some paper yellow to be the stained glass and then glued them together. Once both pieces were dry, I glued the window onto the roof extension and it looked pretty nice. Look at that! Off camera, I constructed the general shapes of the pit cola vending machine and the icebox. I gave them both a white base layer, then went over with a light blue grayish color for the icebox and added the red stripe design to the vending machine. I gave them both a third layer to really add to the vibrance of the colors. What a transition! I mean, look at that. Yeah, so obviously I did the precise detail work off camera, which was the cursive lettering on the cola machine and the ice detailing on the icebox, and I also just cleaned up their paint jobs. Okay, I know there's a theme of me doing stuff off camera here, but I also made the tiny signs for the gift shop. So with all this detail work assembled, it was finally time to attach more stuff to the roof. So I put on the chimney and the roof extension, then turned it around to then work on the gift shop. So I added the little signs, a little caution sign, what's that for? Then I added the little light blue corrugated paper overhang and some pillars. And then I taped it down to dry. And then I added the little Pit Cola vending machine and the icebox and the little sale sign. And to top it all off, I added that very lovely gift shop sign from earlier. From here, the detailing was looking pretty good. Once it was all dry, I peeled off the tape. Remember when I talked about how I didn't know what the back of the shack looked like? Well, turns out there's a porch back there. So, in order to make the porch, I had to add a deck extension. To do this, I used a paper stencil that I cut to be the general size I wanted for the porch, and then copied the steps I'd done to make the main base of the shack. The rainbow popsicle sticks once again made an appearance, but I was able to cover them up pretty quick with paint to match the color of the shack. While that was drying, I'd found more corrugated paper, which I decided to cut out and make into the back porch's overhang. But, in order to put it together, I attached the recently dried porch extension, and further secured it using glued-on paper strips that also helped add variation to the deck wood floor texture. While I was gluing down the paper strips, they kept popping up, and I don't know why I didn't just tape them down, but here's a very painful montage of me just continuously re-gluing them over and over again. Any good building needs an equally good foundation, so I cut out and layered foam strips in order to add elevation to the shack's base. It was really hard to show on camera, but this is kind of how I ended up gluing it. Here's just a fun little 360 view. Since it now had an elevated base, I made stairs up to the shack's side door, which I had also recently discovered was a thing. I also made the little roof peak that serves as an overhang for the side door. Then, to cover up the exposed foam of the base, I cut out strips of cardboard paper and glued them on. I also used little measured out pieces of balsa wood to make the supports for the porches. With the basic foundation now complete, I set about texturing it to make it look more like stone bricks. While I was at it, I also added some roof tiles and siding to the small roof extension. Off camera, I constructed a little staircase leading up to the front porch, and a couple steps for the back deck. With the stairs in place, I covered the porches with a fresh coat of paint. Then, I gave the foundation stones a gray base coat. Then, I quickly painted the extension to match the rest of the roof. And added the support beams. And of course, this side entrance needs a door. I constructed it out of leftover cardboard and painted it a darker brown with a gold handle. Then, I just popped it over one of the windows I'd already made. This shack has survived time, the elements, being an organ, and multiple apocalypses, so these foundation bricks are musty, dusty, and crusty things. This being said, I went over them with a light wash of black paint to add depth and to make them look a bit more weathered. I could finally turn my attention to bedazzling the back deck, so I started constructing the first part of its two overhangs. I built the small bit of tiled overhanging roof following the same steps as I'd done earlier, and then painted it to match the rest of the shack's tiles. By layering two painted cardstock paper cutouts, I constructed the back door and gave it a tiny stained glass window by gluing yellow paper to the back. I gave it a tiny black paper handle, then glued it on. Off camera, I painstakingly made the back deck couch using foam board and rolled paper, and then painted it twice, also off camera. Once I liked how it looked, I glued it on. To make the blue, metal-looking second overhang over the deck, I cut out a piece of corrugated paper and painted it light blue, going over it in a brown paint wash to make it look grimier. Once it was dry, I hot glued it on and added the support beams. Tediously off camera, I did my best to make the tiny hanging lantern. It's a little misshapen, but when I attached it, it didn't look too bad. I also noticed there was some small ventilation and piping, so I quickly made those and added them on. I finished up by crafting all the remaining little signs and details, including the direction arrows and the little price and tour board. The last thing to do was add the outside cellar door, so I gave it a gray base coat and went over it in basic black detailing. And that was it! The shack was finally done. Overall, this project took me around 6 months of working to complete, and I edited over 40 hours of footage for this video. Thank you all so much for joining me on this crazy model making journey, and shout out if you made it this far. I really appreciate it. And you know, maybe I'll make more content in the future. We'll see. Here I have some glamour shots of the final result, and just to give a more authentic woodsy setting, I also took some pictures of it in my backyard.